G'day. The 2025 F1 Belgium Grand Prix has just started, but as the 20 cars head off, another highly choreographed and time-sensitive show has started in the F1 paddock, one that will last several days and involve thousands of people. Oh, and for those of you not subscribed, I invite you to join the channel once you've watched this video. At 4:20 p.m. on Sunday, July 27, 20 F1 cars headed off on a 90-minute race in front of 100,000 fans at the track and tens of millions on TV. But behind the scenes, an army of people were about to get involved in transporting hundreds of tons of equipment and thousands of people from Spa-Francorchamps circuit in Belgium to the Hungaroring in Budapest. That's a journey of 1,250 kilometres, about 780 miles. And all of the teams need to be set up in Hungary in less than 89 hours. The moment Lando Norris put his foot down to cross the line to start the race, crews without an active role in operating the car set to work packing up all of the non-essential gear and loading it into containers and crates which sat in the paddock until well after the race. Once the cars crossed the finish line, the garage techs and mechanics set to work dismantling the front of garage equipment, like these booms. Well, all but the McLaren and some of the Ferrari crew, because those guys were down in Parc Fermé celebrating with Lando, Oscar and Charles. Once the cars were released from Parc Fermé, the mechanics switched back from general logistics to working on the cars, removing engines and gearboxes and draining fluids before rolling the chassis back into the transporters for their road trip to Budapest. That's a journey of 14 to 16 hours. Every team has its own branded fleet of trucks. A mid-sized team like Aston Martin might have 4 or 5, each worth around $600,000, but they also use another 4 or 5 of these DHL trucks, with DHL drivers representing both the team and the company. Mercedes have 8 trucks for their race base. That's all of the engineering and garage gear. And it was packed up by Monday morning in Spa and fully erected by 7:30 a.m. on Tuesday in Budapest. That's a lot quicker than normal due to the new and much wider Budapest paddock. And why would the teams not own all of their trucks? Well, the increased cost of having extra transporters sitting around during the non-European part of the season comes into play. And then, of course, there's the cost cap. So a blend of owned and rental works best. The first truck couldn't access pit lane or pit straight until the track had been cleared. The Spa race featured a track invasion, so the trucks had to sit idle a bit longer than normal before being cleared by an F1 coordinator to move in. Normally the trucks are ready to start loading within 90 minutes of the end of a race. At Spa, trucks moved from various holding areas in the middle of the circuit along the track and awaited permission to enter pit lane. Now Spa's a little bit different because normally you would go in the direction that the cars drive through pit lane. Spa, they go the opposite direction. So McLaren entered first and Sauber last. Trucks are also positioned on pit straight and they receive gear via forklifts. These transporters are packed in a specific order, with the garage stuff being packed up first and the cars last. Once the trucks were full, they headed straight for Budapest. Each of these rigs, fully loaded, cannot exceed 44 tonnes, and normally all are on the road within 5 hours of the checkered flag. Given the journey will take around 15 hours, 2 drivers are required for each truck. A driver cannot drive more than 10 hours, and in most cases, no more than 9 in one stint. And the 2 drivers in each transporter can only drive for a total duty time of 21 hours before a 9-hour break is mandated, or new drivers take over. For the 15-hour trip to Budapest, that shouldn't have been an issue unless there was a lengthy drama en route. With regards packing up pit lane, often we'll be doing team celebration shots in front of a garage a couple of hours after the race, and the gear is being loaded onto monster trucks either side of us. As each truck is filled, it's waved off on its journey and another truck pulls into pit lane or pit straight to be filled with more equipment. It's amazing too the number of bicycles I see being loaded on board. Obviously the crew love the exercise, and if they ride them to and from the track, I imagine it saves the team money on transfers. A fleet of forklifts scurry back and forth in what appears to be organised mayhem. At tracks like Monaco, where the paddock is so small and the garage gear is spread over 3 levels, often extra crew are flown in from the factories to assist each team with their pack-up. And many of the team trucks in Monaco are parked way away from the circuit, some on the jetty behind the Explorer 2 cruise ship, but most are parked many kilometres away from the Principality in France. And while there's plenty of activity going on in the front of the garage, Another group of workers are busily pulling down and packing up the hospitality suites on the lower level. These suites range in size, with Red Bull's being by far the biggest at just over 1,200 square metres. It houses 2 teams and takes around 25 people, 32 hours to erect and slightly less time to pack up. Aston Martin's hospitality suite requires 20 trucks to move it. At McLaren, it uses 10. Those crews work feverishly throughout the night, and by around 6 a.m. Monday morning, all of the garages should have been emptied and the fleet of trucks well on their way to Hungary. Because this equipment is travelling intra-Europe, the paperwork involved in the move is minimal. That's not the case when gear goes backwards and forwards to Britain. As they're no longer part of the EU, drivers need to stop and clear customs at the border. They must show authorities their ATA carnet. That's a document listing all of the equipment on the truck. Authorities can choose to inspect the load, but in most instances, they don't. Although one team member told me that sometimes when customs people see a car on the list, they want to see it, so they'll ask them to open up, except the car's normally in various bits and pieces spread throughout the entire truck. And crossing that UK border does add another couple of hours to everybody's journey. The arrival of hundreds of trucks, though, is no surprise to customs, because they were given the heads up by DHL to expect X number of trucks carrying F1 gear on a very tight timeline. But with the ever-changing nature of customs procedures, more and more is required of the F1 teams to ensure that hold-ups at customs are minimised, and the engines are taken out of the cars for transport. There are 4 manufacturers providing engines in 2025: Mercedes, Ferrari, Honda and Renault. And after each race, these engines are serviced and quarantined. What about the fuel, you cry? Well, there are 4 suppliers, and that's not sent from race to race, but instead it comes from directly from the manufacturers. Petronas, BP and Exxon comes from the UK, while Shell travels from Germany. Post-race, unused fuel is returned to the respective refineries, while the new shipment of fuel heads for the next event. Now, the reason why it's not moved from event to event is that the fuel suppliers don't know how much fuel will be used, as well as once you permanently import fuel into one country, even though it's in the EU, it can't be consumed in another country. At McLaren, Red Bull, Aston Martin, Haas, VCarb, Sauber and Williams, their engine manufacturers provide them with the technicians who work on the engines at each race. Yes, they're dressed in each team's kit, but they are employed by the engine manufacturer. Of course, there are thousands of team members that need to go from one race to the other, but I'll get to them shortly. By 6 a.m. on the Monday morning, all of the Spa garages had gone from this to this, and in a few hours those first trucks from Spa would be arriving at the Hungaroring in Budapest. But a week or so prior to this, a team of workers arrived to set up the non-essential equipment that travelled from the factory or from another race earlier this season. But those advanced teams left the Hungaroring before the weekend kicked off on Thursday and returned to their home base for 3 weeks of summer break. But what happens with overseas races? As the garage gear can't be sent by road, the important equipment is sent air freight with long-time F1 sponsor DHL. By important equipment, I mean the cars, engines, gearboxes, along with the equipment that teams only have one of. But not all freight is sent by air. Teams have 5 or 6 different sets of other gear that is sent by sea freight, and they'll leapfrog races throughout the year. Last year, this crate went from China, round 2, to the 18th race of the season in Singapore, and then on to the last race in Abu Dhabi. And while DHL handles the collection and delivery on land, it will travel with companies like MSC over the ocean. And given that the freight will often arrive well in advance of the next race, containers are held in a secure facility awaiting delivery to the track 8 or so days prior to that race. Oh, another thing, teams will almost always have a set of that equipment on land somewhere in the world, so if there's a drama, they're not caught short. Of course, the reason teams use sea freight is down to money. Air freight can be up to 50 times more expensive than sea freight, but in a sport where timing is key, air freight is a must. Each team will move some 35 tonnes of air freight between flyaway races, and it's usually where it needs to be, even on the other side of the world, within 36 hours of it being collected. Price-wise, it's estimated that for every 1 kilogram of air freight, a team will pay around $400 for it to travel all of the air freight legs this year. The combined total? About $14 million per team, and that's just for air freight. There's no doubt that DHL is a vital cog in the sport. It allows F1 to run 24 races in a season, and the company even has their own motorhome in the paddock. This one is brand new. It replaced this much smaller suite, and the new one is worth around €1 million. That's about 1.1 million US, and they bring a team of around 40 people to each race, and all teams use DHL for their freight. Another big part of the logistics of Formula One is Pirelli, the tyre manufacturer. They have a big workforce in the paddock, and with F1 tyres being manufactured in Romania and Turkey, Pirelli use 3 trucks for slicks, 2 for wet and inters, and 2 for spares. And typically Pirelli will bring 1,600 tyres to every event. Of course, at overseas races, teams don't bring their own hospitality suites. Instead, they're provided with a variety of different types of suites in Australia, Japan, Singapore, Miami, Canada, Azerbaijan, Austin, Mexico, and Las Vegas. They're provided with these types of suites. In China, Bahrain, Jeddah, Qatar, Brazil, and Abu Dhabi, they use permanent suites. But let's go back to Spa after the race on Sunday night, because there are a couple of thousand team personnel that need to get from Spa to Budapest. On the Sunday night, the first people to leave were the team principals, the drivers, and their entourages. Most headed to Liège for a private flight back to Nice or their home base. Max and Fernando are currently the only drivers to own their own planes. The others will share rides with the likes of those drivers or charter their own jets. Those drivers who didn't finish in the top 3 were able to leave an hour earlier than Lando, Oscar and Charles, who had media commitments to attend to. And normally McLaren would have done a celebration shot in pit lane, but given the race started 80 minutes late, Oscar would have missed his private plane departure slot at Liège Airport, so they didn't have one. At tracks like the Red Bull Ring in Austria, though, drivers can be at the Zeltweg private airstrip in a few minutes by car if they have a police escort, and some do on race night. At Spa, though, when the traffic can be gridlocked, a number of drivers flew by helicopter from the circuit to Liège Airport, saving them anywhere from 30 to 80 minutes. Next to leave the track were those not involved in the pack-up, like the marketing and PR crew. Most headed to Liège or Brussels for flights or trains back home booked by their team's travel people. Home for most will be in England, and sometimes F1 charters flights on a race night to get those people back to popular airports in their home country. Teams will pay a premium to get crew on those flights, but it does save them the cost of another night's accommodation and allows crew to be back at home in quick time. Next up, the garage crew will certainly be finished their work by 6 a.m. on Monday and will be booked on flights or trains home for a couple of nights before heading off to Budapest on Wednesday. Those dismantling the hospitality suites, though, are typically the last to leave. And in Spa, each crew had worked through the night and were fed by a small number of catering staff who stuck around to feed those crews at the back of the garages. Once those suites are on the road, many of the crew boarded sleeper coaches for the 15-hour journey through Belgium, Germany, Austria and Hungary. Those coaches allow the crews to arrive somewhat rested, avoid airports and potential lost luggage, and be not too far from their hospitality suite on the road. On arrival, they grabbed a shower at their hotel and headed straight to the Hungaro Ring to get started on the build. Most of the marketing and catering crews arrived into Budapest on the Wednesday prior to the event, getting things ready for Thursday Media Day. The drivers and their managers are next to arrive, most flying private from Nice on Wednesday afternoon or Thursday morning, as they need to be at the track for Media Day, with a number of team principals arriving by commercial or private flights on Friday or Saturday. So who pays for these drivers' private flights? Well, it all depends on their contracts. Some negotiate an annual allowance for flights and then choose how they spend it. Others might have negotiated certain races to be on private charters and the remainder on commercial airlines. They're typically long-haul flights. Accommodation-wise, every team has a travel person or department that sources 60 to 120 rooms for their crew in each race location. In places like Singapore, Las Vegas, Melbourne, Doha and Bahrain, that's a simple task given the number of hotels nearby the track. Finding accommodation, though, in places like Spa, Suzuka and Spielberg is much trickier, and sometimes rental homes are needed or hotels picked further from the track. Those travel planners will also have arranged for a fleet of minivans and cars to ferry crew to and from the track. One thing's for sure, the logistics involved in F1 are extremely complex due to the global nature of the sport. Every detail must be timed perfectly to ensure readiness for race weekends, and when delays or errors happen, personnel must be able to pivot, and quickly. As they say, the show must go on. Now, before you go, could you please hit the like button and check that you're subscribed? About 50% of you will be surprised to know that you're not. You can remedy that right now. And for a whole lot of extra content, F1 merchandise and stuff, This is where you need to look. Thanks for watching, and a sharp outside. No, that's not right. No, that's not right.